Good evening. This is Gene from Listening In Radio, WN9ZWC, KB9001MWDX. And here I am with another installment of Ham Radio Vocabulary. And tonight I'm going to give you a technical term, or an acronym actually, and it's called SWR. Well, what is SWR? Well, SWR in communications and engineering is a measurement of impedance within a line or an antenna line, and it's very important. What does that mean? Well, in ham radio, or citizens band too, more importantly, because SWR is a regular thing in citizens band radio as well. It's important because, despite the technical sound of standing wave ratio, what it means is, from layman's terms, is a measurement of how much power is going out from your radio through your feed line or your coax and out through your antenna. And it's a measurement of how much energy is returned back through that antenna to your radio. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important that when you mount your antenna to a radio, you'll hear a thing in ham radio and citizens band about having a balanced line. So what are you doing? Well, you're balancing the line from your radio, including the coax and the length of the antenna or the height of the antenna, with the radio, so the radio resonates at its proper frequency, right? Now, frequency on the spectrum, no pun intended. There's that word again, spectrum, right? So how your radio resonates at a particular frequency with the antenna. An antenna must be balanced and matched to the radio at a particular frequency. Usually, like with citizens band, they'll match up an antenna with, say, a CB radio by having an antenna that they can either trim back, or the antenna has some type of physical adjustment on it to minimize the measurement. And usually what it should be is, like a good SWR reading is usually 1:1 to 1:3, something like that. Well, how do they do that? Well, let me show you really quick. These are called SWR meters, and there's a couple different types here. This is a typical citizens band radio SWR meter, and it's used simply to measure what's going on with the antenna. Some people do leave these sitting in line with like a tuner or something to balance the line with, so they can monitor what their SWR is, but usually it's used just as a piece of measuring equipment to figure out where your SWR is at, and that's really important. This is called a QRP SWR meter because it works with low power. So low power would be 5 watts and below. I think this one is rated out to it looks like it's rated out to 5 watts actually. That's the max power on it. So, and this is to measure, say, if you're running a QRP Morse code radio, CW, continuous wave, and then you would be able to match the antenna to get the best SWR. And generally, ham radio operators use tuners or auto tuners in line, which is another piece of equipment we'll talk about later on, and I'll show you tuners so you know what that's about. But these are just measurement devices to tell you what the SWR of your radio is. Okay, so how do you get there? Well, in CB, there's a couple different ways. Like I said, sometimes in the old days they would actually cut antennas to a certain length, or they came out with adjustments. There's one antenna that I mounted on my vehicle. It has 2 little rings at the bottom that you rotate to either drop or increase the SWR. But the game here is to make sure that you have a very low reading on the SWR meter, because if you have a high reading, what that means is there's energy coming back into your radio, which could damage your radio. And generally, the signs of that are the radio overheating. A lot of the radios today, newer radios, they have heat sinks in the top or heat sink in back, and you'll actually feel that radio start to heat up, or you touch the top of the radio, it's starting to heat up. You might want to check your SWR, because what's happening is that energy is coming back into your radio from the antenna. That's very bad because it could damage your antenna. There are some radios that are manufactured out there that will drop power if it recognizes the energy coming back into the radio to protect the radio. All the radios didn't have that. All the radios we had, like I said, I go back to the tube days, and in the tube days, if you blew a final in the radio, well, the radio was either done, or you put another final tube in it, or replaced it. So, but we'll talk a lot more in the next video, because I'll talk about tuners and show you my tuners, because I have a couple different types of tuners. and some of them are manual tuners where you have to choose the inductance of the circuit, and then you have to adjust the antenna to match the radio through the box. I also have an auto tuner, which I use on my ICOM 718, and that's really cool. Auto tuners are awesome because they're a no-brainer. When I first got one, it scared the hell out of me because when you key up the radio and put an RF energy through it, the tuner would click, make series of clicks, and it would pop and do all these crazy things, and it just scared the heck out of me until I got used to it. But that was the relays in the the relays in the tuner setting up to match the radio to the antenna, which is really cool. So, in fact, I just ordered a new tuner for CB, and I'm going to use an ADG auto tuner in line with that for low power operation. So that's SWR, and it's something really important to worry about, and you could study up more on it. I'm sure there's plenty online you could find out, but I'm just here to tell you that it's very, very important to the health of your radio and your operation that you match the antenna to the radio. And what that also does, once you have a good matched network with that antenna and the radio gets out better. So if you're pushing like a CB, most are 5 watts, unless of course they've been tuned up for the the user, and maybe they might swing a little bit more towards 10 watts, but it'll make the radio work better. It means all of the signal is leaving the feed line and the antenna and going out into the atmosphere and to the receiver you're talking to. So that's really important. Okay, and I have a couple of bloopers before this video that you might want to check out. But anyway, I had a hard time doing this one because I wanted to take something technical and kind of water it down to where everybody could understand that. But again, if you get a CB and you're new in the radio, and this also works for receiving, by the way. If you're doing like AMDXing, proper length antenna works better than an antenna that's too small, right? And the general rule of thumb for radio operations, and it's counterintuitive, and actually the lower the frequency, the longer the antenna. The higher the frequency, the shorter the antenna. So, food for thought. Okay, I took up enough of your time. Have a great night, and weekend's coming up. Have a great weekend. Check out those bloopers.